Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I think I was had my Bluetooth going, and I think that's why I was couldn't hear
Oh,
me at
okay.
first. Is Robin right? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Hey, I'm Jack. Nice to meet you. Thanks for taking time out of your day.
Sure.
So you have a
Although I can hear myself on an echo, which is going to be impossible to talk to you with. Do you want me to try to call you again? Isn't it going through a Google Voice number?
yeah, and that's just so I can transcribe later. I have to record. But yeah, I mean we could try. It shouldn't be an echo though. It's strange.
Here, let me test it. Testing. It went away. Okay.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So you have was that a toddler? You said.
She's almost 2. Yeah, and she tends to fight the naps more and more.
Oh yeah, almost 2. That's a fun age.
Yeah, she is. Do you have kids?
No, I have nieces and nephews though, and I've been through the that age with a bunch of them. I actually that's one of my favorite times. I like when they're 2. They say terrible twos, and they get unhappy if you like change the setting or whatever, or want to go do something different. It's like that usually sets them off. But I guess it depends on the kid. But I mean, yeah, I like my nieces and nephews a lot.
Yeah, it's like I think once 18 months hits, they get to have a lot of personality and a lot of capability,
Right.
and it just gets to be more fun. Yeah, so I love it too. I think Terrible Twos, they really coined that for a commercial, like back in the day, 'cause it had a better ring to it.
Yeah.
It's actually 3. That's the tyrannical one. But anyways,
Right. Yeah, because they start they start learning new tricks, and they get used to
yeah.
the routine and start to find little ways to exploit you.
Yeah, I think I read back in the day that they were trying to market cigarettes to housewives. So they coined Terrible Twos, like Escape
Oh,
from the Terrible Twos.
interesting.
And when it's actually 3. So,
Right.
anyway,
Right.
I was like, I haven't checked on that story, but is it? I've thought that right.
Yeah. And do you have any kids in like grade school?
Yeah, I have a kindergartner and a second grader.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. So I'm guessing that's how you got started going to school boards and stuff like that with Moms for Liberty.
No, not at all, actually. Do you want me to go into the start of it?
Sure.
Um, so my kindergartner, her last year of preschool was impacted by COVID. And then she was headed into kindergarten in the fall of 2020. And I was aware that our public schools have a problem. I just, I was like most parents, I'm like, well, it's probably fine in the younger grades. And, how bad could it be in kindergarten? They wouldn't do that to a kindergartner. And my daughter really loved the idea of riding on the school bus and seeing, big stuff. And so we had enrolled her for kindergarten. And I assumed it'd be fine. And that at a later date, we might put her in private school. But this is also Williamson County. It's known for the schools. It's a conservative county. Everybody thinks, all that stuff isn't here. So that was the plan. And then in July of 2020, the school announced its COVID policy, which was masking and social distancing. And I was watching the numbers close enough to know that was just wholly unnecessary. And I don't feel like it takes a genius to know that you're going to really negatively impact kids by doing that. Like everybody's talking about these studies now. And Randy Weingarten's like try to blame it on, this, that, and the other. But as a parent, back in the summer of 2020, I'm like, you mask my child 8 hours a day, there's going to be very negative side effects, So I was adamant that they were not going to mask my daughter because also her COVID risk is like almost nil. So I pulled her out of public school before it ever even started. And there was a private school that was starting up around that same time. and was looking to fill its classrooms, and they did not mandate masks or social distancing. And I checked on their curriculum. It sounded great, so I put her in that school, and that was just a lucky break. Because, July before an August school year start, usually there's just no options for you. But this one was starting, and we put her in that, and she thrived. And incidentally, nobody in the class ever had a COVID scare. So,
yeah.
And so for me at that point, life's hunky-dory. I can go on my merry way, and I don't have to worry about the public schools here. And that's what I did. But I always keep an ear to the ground. I listen a lot. Like, I go through my day with an AirPod in, or at least I used to, and I'd listen to audiobooks or podcasts or radio. And I was very aware of critical race theory. And I was also aware that DEI is critical race theory, which I think most people were not yet aware of that. And, and I was abhorred to hear what it does to organizations or any institution that it touches. And then in February of 2021, somebody shared an article with me that our local school, our county school, had hired a DEI consultancy. And that's when I'm like, oh, wait a minute, because, I'm reading and learning about how these policies basically institute racism, and, and then it rots in the organization from the inside out. So my take on that was like, well, if you, do this to 40,000 children in Williamson County that go home to roughly 40,000 households, that's where it starts, right? You're planting this like rotten seed in 40,000 households, which is the county, which is our future. I just saw, this long view of what happens, and said, we can't allow this. But, at that point, it wasn't on my shoulders to fix it. So I started to ask some other parents, because my kid's not in public school, I don't have really a lot of public school friends.
Right.
But, just like on a couple of Facebook pages, I brought it up, or I see some conversations, and all the parents at the time were heavily focused on masking, which you wouldn't fault them for, because that's just the biggest thing that's right in front of their faces every day, and the thing that their kid is most acutely suffering from every single day. And so because my kid wasn't in school and wasn't subjected to that, I was the only one of the few that was seeing this other thing over here, like, hey guys, we got to worry about this. So I started to talk to people, and they said, okay, tell us more about it. And then I just put like a flyer out, on social media, saying, hey, if, I'm meeting at my house. And I had no idea who was going to come or where the flyer had gone. But 19 people showed up, and the meeting lasted for about 3 hours. And that was the start. That was the start of our chapter.
Okay. Is that all it takes? You just invite people, and kind of you have like a certain amount of people
you have to register with 10 members to start your chapter.
Gotcha.
So that was the start. So, with those 19 names, and I sent the names on to Moms for Liberty National and said, hey, I'd like to start a chapter. And I had known about them. I'd heard them on the radio on Glenn Beck, actually. And at the time, I thought, that's a really great idea if you're wanting to do something, because they've already got the logo figured out. They got the name figured out. All you have to do is take it and run with it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and then you have kind of a support network going into it.
Right.
So I thought, great, I don't need to start my own group. I'll just use this one.
Perfect.
So that's how I decided to use that.
Nice. And how soon after that were you and others speaking at I think from the article, the Tennessean, it was 2021, where they started picking up on the stories about speaking about the books and things like that?
Yeah, so that was April, and then within 2 weeks there was this mixer that the county Republican Party was hosting with our superintendent.
Okay.
And we were planning this big presence at the mixer. We didn't expect to be able to talk, but we were going to show up, wear the shirts, have a visual presence of parents that are concerned, and that was going to be kind of our first effort. And then the superintendent, as a result, just didn't go. So, but a couple of school board members did, and I actually wasn't there because I had a 6-month-old at the time. So if I don't have to be anywhere, then I'm not going, right?
Right.
So, and on their own, they started asking about critical race theory. And then parents at this meeting, and it was reported in a newspaper article, there were at least 2 parents that talked about their second grade children being negatively impacted by the curriculum. So, and that's also to say that I started to counter a DEI, consultancy that had been hired. It was almost immediately into that effort that we became aware of this second grade boy. And he's biracial. He has a white father and a Thai mom. And she wrote a letter to the superintendent talking about how the curriculum had emotionally traumatized her son, and that he was ashamed to be white, ashamed to be an American, only wanted to identify as Thai, ashamed of his white dad and his white grandparents. Where did that come from, and how could the school be the ones to do this to him? And so that's where we started to focus on this curriculum, because I'm like, hold the phone, because we're trying to stop critical race theory from coming in.
Right. And which book was...
The evidence is it's already here.
Which specific book was that caused the emotional distress?
It was a whole module.
A module?
Of books. Yes, it's grade 2, module 3, and the title of the module was Civil Rights Heroes.
Okay.
So it's how they present a
Is that K? Is that K through 12 Years a Slave? I heard about there's a book called K through 12 Years a Slave. Is that the same thing, or is that something different?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
Okay. Sorry, what was the name of the book?
There was like 5 books in the module.
Oh, right.
So, one of the books is beautiful, and we have no problems with it. It was a book about Martin Luther King. We thought it was a very age-appropriate, beautiful way to present the civil rights movement to a child at that age.
Yeah.
And that's what they lead off the module with. But then after that, there's another book called MLK and the March on Washington, and then there's 2 Ruby Bridges books, and then there was another book called Separate is Never Equal.
Yeah.
And the first 3 are not so bad on their own. The second Ruby Bridges book gets a little graphic, for a second grader. It just goes a little too into the violence.
Because it's showing the white people that are saying you're not allowed to go into our school.
Yeah, it's like
maybe
shouting at her, wanted to kill her.
Which is like what happened. Which is what happened, right?
Yeah. So.
So maybe like the faces, there could be an alternative, because there's the signs too, and it has the unsettling language from the whites, the angry whites, and maybe instead of the angry faces, there can be put the frown upside down. But I'm not sure about, how you even begin to tell a story. And what was the 5th one? I'm sorry, is it Separate is Never Equal? Sorry, I cut out for a second.
Never Equal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so it's also when you pair these books up with the teacher's manuals, that's when you really see the drumbeat of the whole module, right? It's very much a critical social justice drumbeat for second grade.
Right. And another thing I saw was
the teacher's manuals that really blew the minds of our parents. It was just kind of like, what? This is how it's being presented? Because you're taking a story about Ruby Bridges, which is a great story, and you're just weaponizing it to either victimize or shame a small child.
Yeah. And which one was so I got Ruby Bridges Goes to School, My True Story by Ruby Bridges. Is that the same one?
That was one of them. I have to hold on.
There's a one that's got with weapons. It was a little more weaponizing. Because I did see the white
one that's
people.
illustrated by Robert Cole is the one that's a little more.
I did see white people. They had the U.S. Marshals that escorted her to school. They did carry weapons. Let's see here.
Yeah, and like the half Thai boy, he thought that was cool. Actually, like, hey, a police officer takes you to school. But,
yeah, I guess the not cool part would be the angry mob of people, that want you to not be alive because you are who you are. Let's see. What was the name of Robert?
I'm looking through it. It's right here by Robert Cole. Yeah.
Oh. Maybe I have a different one.
But I mean, like, all of this is. Have you been through our website?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Okay. No, I didn't get this one, and that's one. This is the Robert Cole's is completely different. And so, what are some of the things that they say that are weaponizing in there? And I wish I would have known that this was the book and not this one I have. I would have gotten it. But I'm curious, just because I wanted to take a look.
I mean, have you been to our chapter website with the Wit and Wisdom page?
Oh yeah.
Okay. I mean, because there's, a couple presentations on there where we explain it, we put the pictures up, and we talk about it, and we pull excerpts from the teacher's manual.
Yeah.
I can send you that link, but
do you remember what?
It's also hard.
Do you remember what it was, or
the link or the book?
Just the stuff that was like weaponizing, like the examples.
I would encourage you to go look at it. It's the thing that makes it hard to debate in the public space about, especially when nobody will debate you face to face, is it's very nuanced.
Right.
It's not the CRT here in Williamson County is not like the physical segregation that went on in Chicago and other places, right? It's more of a nuanced way. It's more, instead of cutting your arm off, it's more like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah.
You're still going to bleed out either way, that Wit and Wisdom just has these undercurrents more. And that's why, they fire back, oh, well, you want to ban Ruby Bridges. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this line again. No, I never said I wanted to ban Ruby Bridges, but you can't weaponize it to hurt children.
Right.
And
that
the
was
best defense against that allegation is to use the words of Ruby Bridges herself, because in multiple NPR interviews she's quoted as speaking about the colorblindness of children and their innocence that they're born with, and the only way children become racist is when adults introduce that to them. So, that's my point, is like, why are we marinating little kids that are innocent in racism? Because critical race theory is racist by nature.
And talk about HBO 580. I know there's some language in there that says that you're not allowed to say things that are like the United States is fundamentally racist, and how Moms for Liberty can help steer that in the right direction.
Well, that is called the Prohibited Concepts Law, and it's pretty much in place just to keep any teaching from shaming or victimizing a child based on their country that they live in, their country of origin, their skin color, their religion, their orientation, any of those things, right? So it's a broad brush law for that reason. And we filed a complaint under it, and the complaint was rejected on technicality. And then another parent group in Tennessee filed a complaint recently, and that was rejected again when the complaint was really quite valid.
What was the technicality?
So, she said that I filed it for the 2020-2021 school year.
Oh, I see.
Before the law was in effect. And I'm just, it's kind of an, are you kidding me reaction, because you're talking about little children here. Like, you as an adult do not get the luxury of dismissing complaints on technicality. If this is affecting children, then you need to look at it, examine it on the merits.
Right.
Because a technicality is such a cop-out, especially that one. And then they enforced, they drafted the rules enforcement for that bill so that I can't refile the complaint. And there's a lot of parents out there, that made a lot of news back in the fall. And I had an acquaintance, she worked for CBS actually, and she called to do a follow-up about the rules enforcement. And the rules enforcement is that it has to be a parent of a child currently enrolled. It has to be within 60 days, and what's the third one? Anyways, but it's highly restrictive. And she said, well, why? What's the problem with that? And I said, well, Google my name, and the amount of heat and criticism that I have taken over this complaint that I filed. And your average parent does not have the thick skin for that. And they don't want that kind of scrutiny, and they're not going to do it. And then and they will also fear that their child who is currently enrolled is going to have some kind of blowback because of them stepping out and speaking out. So
right.
It's unfortunate because even, we have grandparents who would love to file the complaint. They're not in the current active workforce. They want to file a complaint on behalf of their grandchild, and they can't. But, it's like this curriculum, we started with that grade 2 module 3, and we started just hyper-focused on critical race theory. But when you take the 30,000-foot view on K through 5th grade, you find it's not end-to-end critical race theory. It is end-to-end social-emotional learning with little pockets of CRT, especially the largest, most obvious one being grade 2 module 3. But what we found was just dark, negative, graphic, age-inappropriate concepts being taught to kids in every single grade with common threads that would surprise you. One being cannibalism.
Oh.
And everybody was really surprised. Like, there's cannibalism brought up in 3 grades? And, and people, think we're crazy or we're too, but the thing is, you see in an overall culture, since we brought this to light, that there are these trends emerging where things are being normalized. And then I saw, was it Love and Bones? It's like a new movie at, I think it's Sundance, one of the film festivals.
Yeah.
And it's about teen cannibals who fall in love with each other. I don't know if they eat each other in the end, but I mean, really? And you see, a lot of just mentions of, like, even there was like a mention of, it was on the news, Heidi Klum saying that she drank the blood of her husband.
Oh, right.
But it's like, it's like out in mainstream, you see it like more and more and more. And so we're like, wait, cannibalism for elementary kids. And then you see this movie come out about teen cannibals, and you're like, this just doesn't feel like a coincidence. This feels like cannibalism is trying to be normalized in society. And then you introduce gender fluidity to first graders with this Seahorse book that the parents took issue with. And we don't feel like that's a coincidence, because then there's a movie out, I believe it was in 2015, Seahorse, the man who had a baby. We've got pregnant man emojis on our phones. So it's like, of course, when you marry this book up to the teacher's manual, it just focuses almost solely on the man has the babies, and then it tells the kids, it plants the seed right there. It says, identity is a fluid and mysterious thing.
They're trying to turn us into trying to turn us into seahorses. Did you see the Muppets one?
No.
There was what was it? because you brought up the cannibalism in the blood. There's somebody down in, I don't know, is it South LA, some district, and I'll have to send you the link. But yeah, it was like Miss Piggy's, menstruation. It was very sexual with Kermit.
Ew.
Yeah, he actually
God.
he ate Miss Piggy's anus, and it was Animal was there, and the drummer, and it could have gotten a lot.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they could have gotten a lot of trouble if this thing got published, but thankfully.
Well, even on the news today, Peppa Pig, which my 2-year-old enjoys,
Yeah.
Peppa Pig's introducing LGBTQ. And I'm like, for a 2-year-old, like 2 to 4-year-old, that's like the target audience of Peppa Pig. Do we really need to sexualize that audience? It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, was it just Peppa Pig talking about like people?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a same-sex couple, and, it's just...
Does
But,
Peppa Pig show like heterosexual couples?
Yes.
Okay.
Which shows,
But they don't
the
show,
moms and the
Peppa
daddies.
Pig doesn't show the mommies and the daddies. They're not having sex or anything.
No.
Okay.
So,
And they didn't show
yeah.
so they didn't show the LGBT, they didn't show them having sex or anything either, did they?
I only heard about it reported on the news, but I would hope not.
Oh, right. Yeah, it'd be big news, I think,
Yeah.
if they sexualized a children's show.
But, there's one on Netflix, there's a Jurassic Kids
Mm-hmm.
series, right? You heard about that with a lesbian kiss, and it's just like, for my 7-year-old, no, I'm not going there. I'm not going
Right.
there. Like, my 7-year-old hasn't had to talk about the birds and the bees. We are not going there right now.
Right.
And it's, highly just inappropriate and a trampling of parents' rights for schools to think that they have the right to do that.
Yeah.
And if you present these things at such a young age, then that the school or whoever's presenting is largely controlling a narrative. And if it's coming from the teacher, then the teacher for a kid of that age is just on this pedestal. They're like up there with parents, right? Your teacher can do no wrong. You fear your teacher. You honor the teacher, right?
Yeah.
And the teacher says this, then you're going to listen. So that's where, the parental rights issue takes place. If somebody wants to tell their 7-year-old, about all that, then that's their prerogative as a parent, but it's not the school's prerogative.
They do
That's the
some
same
violent
with,
stuff too is coming out. There's a lot of violent stuff, and it even starts with the shows. There's like the Blue's Clues,
Yeah.
Clifford the Big Red Dog. I mean the red blue thing gets a little gang violence, and it's just not something we should see at such a young age
Oh.
in development. Yeah,
I haven't even watched the new Clifford, but I just found that
Yeah.
I've taken my kids back in time a little bit to the oldies but goodies.
Oh yeah,
And I even noticed that Disney's putting out a new Pinocchio, and if you watch the old Pinocchio, there's really good values and life lessons in that movie, talking about your conscience and how you know right from wrong, and I'm just like, I'm not going to show my kids the new one because I'm 100% sure that those messages are turned on their head.
yeah. What a world we live in.
It's terrifying as a parent. I think if I didn't have kids, then I would just shake my head and bite back on Twitter or whatever, with a snarky comment. But you see the innocence of your children, and you'll fight for that till kingdom come.
Yeah.
And even my daughter in the private school, she had a younger teacher in her 20s that didn't have kids. And, so she's millennial. Millennials are more, marinated in all this critical theory and the social justice stuff. So this teacher likely had no idea, that anything that she was doing was questionable. That she showed my daughter's kindergarten class a video that's from a book called I Am Martin Luther King Jr. And the cover of that book is very cartoony and looks innocuous, and there can't be anything bad in this book. But then lo and behold, you've got segregated black kids, white kids. The black kids have it so bad, the white kids are sitting pretty on the school on top of the hill. And you bring in tear gas and billy clubs and attack dogs and bad policemen, and that is heavy stuff for a kindergartner who's just, at that age, I'm like, hey, little Johnny, if you get lost at the park, you find a policeman because they're good, right? We don't need to go into policemen are racist and going to, spray black kids. Like, that is just not the time.
And do you...
Gets in the car.
I'm sorry. Keep going. Go ahead. No,
well,
please.
So she gets in the car. I dropped her off that morning. She was colorblind.
Mm-hmm.
In the true innocence of a child, colorblind. I've watched her play with kids of all different colors on the playground, and I observed because I think this is before any of this started, because I think it's beautiful that my daughter just didn't see their differences. And there was like this one dark-skinned girl, just, very incredibly dark-skinned. And my daughter described her by her shoes. Yeah, the girl with the cool shoes. And that's just, you see the world through her eyes, and you're like, it's beautiful. There's so much innocence there and joy. And you as a parent will fight to keep that, because the world will rob them of that inevitably. But let's not rush it, So she gets back in the car that afternoon, and suddenly she's first time ever talking about skin color. And, and injustices and bad white people and victimized black people. And I'm kind of like, what in the world just happened, And then I got a copy of the video, and I'm like, this is just wholly age inappropriate. I sent it, to the other parents. 99% of the parents in the class were outraged because it was age inappropriate. The school director was outraged. But I went in and I talked to this teacher, and I said, look, I'm not trying to, get you in trouble or whatever, but I was like, look, you're early 20s, you don't have kids. I'm going to share with you my perspective. And I'm like, when you have a little baby and you watch them grow up and you see what innocence looks like, and before you have that child, you cannot conceive of that innocence. It's like the world before the fall, They're just joyful, and there's just no malice, there's no, and it's hard to describe. It's just something you have to go through. So once that's your treasure, right, to safeguard through life and have them, introduce things in an age-appropriate way, then you take that very seriously. And I told her, it's like, this way that you presented Martin Luther King, there's a very age-appropriate way to teach this story. And this, you robbed them of innocence, that is never coming back. Once it's gone, it's gone. And there was no need to do it in kindergarten. Because their minds aren't even ready to process, and I use the analogy, too, that, I have children's Bibles that we read from periodically, and there's, different levels of children's Bible. And one of them is like, for 6 to 8 year olds, but it has very beautiful pictures. So we still read from it, even though my kids were younger at the time, 3 and 5 actually. And, so we get to the story of Abraham and Isaac, and it's a picture of his father, putting his son on an altar with a knife overhead. And the story is about how God told him to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, my 3 and 5 year old are not ready for that story, because the only thing they're going to remember is that dad was going to kill his son and God told him to do it. There's no, the bigger picture of obedience and faith, and none of that will be, sinking in. Only this very graphic part, and that they're not ready to process that.
Right.
And that's the same with, the civil rights movement, the way it's taught in the 2nd grade. And as I understand, if you chronologically go through history, in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd grades, they're actually teaching antiquity, like Athens, Greece, way back then. And the civil rights era doesn't really start until middle school, when the kids they have a foundation of history by then, and they have a bigger perspective to look at, this very dark chapter of American history. There's perspective that you need to have, and they're developmentally ready for it. But this curriculum pulls that into the second grade, and actually into kindergarten too.
And speaking of civil, you also have the Civil War, which is extremely violent. Many beheadings and all sorts of stabbings, gunshots, and to have that in
Which
there.
war? The Civil War?
The civil one, yeah. It wasn't a very civil.
Yeah, there was some really graphic stuff in the fifth grade. Pictures that, kind of I recoil at. And I'm like, we're showing this to fifth graders?
Yeah.
But that's the whole point of the curriculum, right? Like, we started with CRT, and then you look at the whole thing, and you're like, this whole thing is just meant to be dark and graphic and negative and, emotional. And if you look at the teacher's manuals, it talks about emotion more than any other thing. It's an English language arts curriculum. It's supposed to teach them how to read and write, and that's it. And they're all talking about feelings and emotions, and it's just kind of like, okay, what are you trying to do here?
Well, this isn't for history? This isn't for history class?
No, this is English language arts.
I guess it's seems like they're combining the two. Otherwise, you'd read old classics from, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and James Monroe and Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, James K. Polk, Zachary Taylor, Andrew Johnson, and Ulysses S. Grant, who all owned slaves, the founding fathers. And that's just anti-American, I would say, anti-tradition, maybe anti-church a little as well.
Yeah, there's a third grade module that's very anti-church. It's about Galileo, but instead of focusing on Galileo's achievements, the teacher's manual and the book focuses on church persecution. There's a lot of really satanic, cultish imagery in it.
What's the age? What's a good number for when these concepts start being introduced? And when and are we going middle school and no violence until middle school? Or violence if we can tell a story? Like, how is the guideline there as far as what we're looking for?
Well, so I'm not, I'm a parent, so I'm not an expert, and so I can speak to my current second grader, what I think is appropriate for her. But, if you look back, and I've bought her, she loves to read, so I bought her a bunch of books with beautiful illustrations that are old fairy tales, like Grimm's fairy tales. And we go through it, and there's violence in the fairy tale, and there is death, and but it doesn't go into gore about it. It's just, kind of states that it didn't end well for, the witch and Hansel and Gretel, right? But there's also, there's not a political narrative in it. There's maybe a value that's being taught, but there's no, the witch was white, so she deserved it. There's no social justice drumbeat in there. And it's not it just focuses on the death of the witch endlessly to try to make them have an emotional reaction. It's just, so I think, kids can handle the facts of life, and it's easier to teach a child about death, right? My kids, their grandmother just died 3 weeks ago. So, they've had to understand that, and we've had that talk, and that's a fact of life. But,
I'm sorry to hear that.
Going into, huh?
Oh, I just said I'm sorry to hear that. Was that your mother or spouse's?
My husband's mother. But kids can handle that. But when you start weaving social justice things and emotional, and your social emotional learning, the end game is to create just a very emotional being that's not, the left loves, right, the left hates objective truth, right? So it's according to what the Smithsonian, and their article about whiteness, that being on time and meritocracy and objective truth, those are all racist, right? They hate objective truth. So, you take this emotional curriculum and you're teaching kids just emotion, feelings. How do you feel? How does that make you feel? Feelings are subjective. I know your feelings, so they're not wrong, but there's no objective truth in there, right? It's just, we're going to learn about Ruby Bridges, and we're not really going to focus on the facts. We're just going to elicit emotional response from you by pointing to the most grisly details and emphasizing them over and over again.
Yeah.
It's so at the end of the day, you start them in kindergarten. By the time they get to high school, and then you marry that up with action civics, which is how to protest, and then you're just going to have generations of kids that are taught to burn it down, rather than, hey, let's objectively sit down and find the truth and rationalize, our way through a problem. And I think that's by design.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Trying to see if I have any other questions. If I have some follow-ups. Is that any time for that? Or
yeah, of course.
Okay. 'Cause sometimes
this topic is one that takes some time to unpack.
Right. Sometimes
I had a Wall Street Journal guy call a year ago.
Yeah.
And he wrote for something else, and he could tell that he was really kind of exasperated and rolling his eyes that he had to report on education. Right? It's just probably thought it was super boring. And a couple of years ago, I probably would have thought the same thing. But we start talking about this stuff, and we talked for an hour, and he just, it's kind of like, wow, when you start getting the 30,000-foot view of what our kids are being taught, racialization, sexualization, emotionalization, and there's even more than that, it's just kind of blows the mind.
I wish I could reach out and talk to that Wall Street Journal reporter.
I can try to find his name somewhere in my emails.
Okay, well, no worries if not.
But yeah, it was interesting. He said at the beginning, he's like, we're just going to talk for 10 minutes. And I'm like, all right, 10 minutes, that's cool. And we talked for an hour.
Right.
So. So yeah, call back anytime. I mean, and on our website, there's a 90-minute YouTube video of me presenting Let's Talk Wit and Wisdom 2.
Okay.
And it's because the live feed was just so garbled by a bad connection for the original event that I had to go into a studio and re-record the whole thing.
Gotcha.
And to me, recording that for 90 minutes, right? 90 minutes just talking to a camera was torture.
It is.
There's no audience feedback. You're just like, I don't know if I'm, it sucks.
Right.
And I remember walking out of there, and I told the guy, I'm like, nobody's going to want to watch that. It sucks. So dry. And then we had a chapter meeting on Tuesday where I went and I did kind of a CRT review. So every month has a topical focus for us this school year. And September is a review of CRT. And then the next month will be SEL. Then the next month will be the trans agenda. And we have, speakers and events lined up for all of them. So we did so I just went back to the old videos and I pulled screenshots of where they could go and rewatch if they're new. I couldn't believe it, but that 90-minute video has over 13,000 views. That, to me, is insane. I would expect to knock a couple of zeros off of it, Yeah. So, and that video spurned the parents that filed the CRT complaint in East Tennessee said that they started based on that video. And then there's a current lawsuit over wit and wisdom in Williamson County, and it started with that video.
Wow.
So you never know where a video is going to go.
Right. Wow, that's inspiring. What's the best way
if you want to go watch a super dry 90-minute video, we explain it all in excruciating detail, and there's a couple parts that we hadn't uncovered yet that aren't in it. But, I can tell you about afterwards if you want. But
Yeah, I'll watch it and I'll shoot you an email. Do you have to be a mom to be a mom for liberty?
No, we got dads, grandpas, and we got just women that aren't moms at all, that have no children, but see the importance of it.
Seahorses. Can you be a seahorse for liberty? Just kidding.
There's a lot of memes out there. The left, our left group, here in Williamson County, they seized on that seahorse thing and was going, very quickly was the first thing that they wanted to mock us on. And me, right or wrong, because I'm new to this whole thing, I was like, you want to throw down about seahorses? Let's go. I'll throw down about seahorses. Because they weren't in the room when I briefed it. In that original Harley-Davidson event where there's 300 parents and the photos of the seahorse sex come up, on the screen. And I'm like, and here it is, like the collective gasp from parents. They were horrified. Because there's no preparation for them, right? Because when you see something the first time, it's your gut reaction. You're not going to overanalyze it and talk yourself out of it. And when the picture came up and they were like, oh, that's in first grade, that was their guttural reaction. And so, it's like when the memers came out, I'm like, fine, let's go. Because I know what the audience did and you don't. And this is valid.
The memers?
So, yeah.
Like people who write memes?
I know it's like just local people. They, Moms for Liberty and Seahorses or whatever.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So, but I mean, if they're making memes, that means you're having an impact in some way. So I don't, and we joke about seahorses all the time, So
who doesn't? Who doesn't?
Yeah, it sounds silly on the surface, but when you look at the book and the video that you're planting the seed in the mind of a child, a first grader, it's a very serious thing. And then you see the movie that came out around the same time, and then you look at the trans agenda and the 4,000% increase in young girls going trans. There's another journalist, she said, well, don't you think it's because they feel more open to speak about their gender dysphoria? And my response was 4,000% more. Like that? No, 4,000%. That is something else at work. So, and I think that's emerged as probably the greater threat to kids, far more than CRT is.
Seahorses.
It's the gender ideology in schools that's just leading kids to mutilate themselves and change themselves.
Yeah.
Because if you take a kindergarten or you start them in kindergarten, and in critical race theory, there's really no way out of it, regardless of your skin color, right? If you're a black child, you're a victim, and you're demeaned as a result of that. And if you're a white child, you're an oppressor, and you're shamed as a result of that. So there's no way to exit CRT as a winner. So, starts in kindergarten, problems with your skin color, and then you bring it up, in whatever grade that, hey, you know what? Trans is awesome. It's like a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. You'll be so happy when you switch your gender. That's where your 4,000% increase comes from. In my opinion, you've got kids that are really depressed and grasping at straws. And then they present trans, with these drag queens. They're like, oh, this is so great. And kids at that age, they'll do whatever you tell them is great. Yeah, I'll do that. Is it cool? I'll do that, So, but, seahorses, you can watch seahorses all day long, but that's a seed that's been planted in the first grader.
Seahorses. Well, I guess, is there anybody else I should talk to maybe, or I think this is This has been great, though. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, there's somebody who's really far better. I'm just a mom, right? Learning as I go. But there's a teacher here. She's actually a PhD in education and has helped us quite a bit, kind of mentoring us and understanding all of this. And she is excellent to talk to and a far better source of information on this than I am. So I can connect you with her.
Sure.
Okay.
That sounds great. All right, yeah, I guess I'll let you know if I have any follow-ups. And, yeah, a lot of times I do just because I listen over the recording again and like, oh, I should ask this, should have asked that. But I appreciate your all the time you give me, and thanks for finally connecting.
Yeah. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.